Let's jump right in, shall we? Welcome to this explainer. Today we're doing something a little different. We are going to lower our voices, dim the lights, and totally dissect a really thrilling piece of microfiction called The Haunted Well. Seriously, how does a writer build completely unbearable tension and deliver a spine-shivering twist in, less than a minute of reading time? Well, let's break down the exact anatomy of this terrifying tale, literally piece by piece.
Okay, let's dive into this. You know, every great suspense thriller has to establish a boundary, right? A hard line that characters are explicitly told, do not cross this. Our story sets the scene immediately in this small village with an old well, and the rule of this place is absolute. It's uncompromising. Whoever goes near the old well at 12 a.m. never returns. Notice how stark that is? The author doesn't bog us down with a long, drawn-out history of victims or some complex demon mythology. Nope, it's just a hard rule tied to a specific time, midnight, and a definitive, terrifying consequence: you never return. This instantly establishes the dark lore and drops us right into the mystery. We know exactly what the stakes are before we even meet the main character.
And speaking of our main character, let's look at the actual catalyst for this whole nightmare. Enter Rohan. He's 17 years old, and he possesses the ultimate classic fatal flaw of pretty much every horror protagonist: absolute skepticism. I mean, we all know a teenager exactly like this, right? Completely convinced they know better than centuries of local lore. Rohan outright refuses to believe these warnings. He decides that tonight, he's going to go uncover the truth. What's so brilliant about this setup is that Rohan's mindset is the literal engine driving the entire plot. If he was cautious, well, there'd be no story. His teenage arrogance and curiosity act as the ultimate trigger. Since we already know the rule of the well, the second Rohan decides to investigate, this intense feeling of inevitable doom just washes over the whole narrative. We're essentially just sitting there, waiting for the trap to spring.
Now look at how rapidly things escalate. The pacing here is just incredibly aggressive. Rohan decides to go. The clock strikes exactly 12 a.m. He reaches the well, and almost instantly he hears the sound of a girl crying. Then, shortly after that, boom, a frantic phone call from his mother. In just a matter of a few sentences, the author walks us from quiet defiance straight into active terror. There is zero meandering here. Actually, by compressing the timelines so tightly, the author traps us, the reader, in that exact same sudden, breathless panic that Rohan himself is about to experience.
To make that crazy rapid escalation actually work, the author relies super heavily on sensory isolation. So Rohan is out there at midnight. Total silence everywhere. Absolute darkness surrounds him, and it's pierced only by this single beam from his flashlight as he shines it down into the pitch-black well. Think about how a flashlight actually works in the dark for a second. It gives you severe tunnel vision, right? You can only see exactly what the light hits, which means you are completely blind to whatever is lurking in your periphery. By highlighting these specific environmental details, the story forces us right into Rohan's perspective, creating just absolute dread. We are leaning over and looking down into that dark void right alongside him. And then, the silence breaks. Out of the total darkness at the bottom of the well, Rohan hears a soft, slow voice. It simply whispers, "Pull me out." Think about the terrifying contrast of that. You have the dead silence of a sleeping village at midnight, completely shattered by this fragile, eerie plea coming from an impossible depth. The author makes a point to note that Rohan is scared, but of course that fatal curiosity of his forces him to look down again. This auditory cue is the bait. It's not some giant monster roaring. It's a quiet, intensely unsettling request that pulls Rohan and us closer to the edge. And this brilliantly illustrates the terrifying, step-by-step manifestation of this entity. The author doesn't just throw the monster at us all at once. It's layered. First, we get that soft voice. Then, as Rohan looks closer, a stark white face slowly materializes out of the dark. Finally, the horrifying details snap into focus: long black hair and eyes that are completely, entirely black. The contrast of stark white against pitch black, combined with that unnatural void where eyes should be, creates an incredibly disturbing mental image. The entity is basically constructed in our minds piece by piece, which makes its sudden physical presence feel incredibly heavy and honestly far too real. But it doesn't just stay at the bottom of the well. The text tells us that this horrifying white face begins to slowly rise upwards. It's ascending toward him. The atmospheric pacing here is absolutely crucial. If the entity just, teleported out of the well, it would be a cheap jump scare. But the slow, deliberate, silent ascent, that forces Rohan to just stand there and watch his doom approach. It's pure, visceral horror. The text specifically notes that Rohan physically steps back in fear. He's retreating, realizing way too late that the village rules were completely real all along. Then, right at the peak of this agonizing tension, the author executes a masterful pivot. Suddenly, Rohan's phone rings. It completely shatters that isolated atmosphere. It's his mother, and her voice is just laced with sheer panic. She says, "Rohan, wherever you are, come home immediately." Rohan, confused and obviously terrified by what's rising out of the well, asks why. This is such a brilliant structural choice. The author takes all that immense tension that was focused entirely on the well and completely rips our attention away. Suddenly, the threat isn't just in front of him. Something else is terribly, terribly wrong.
And the horrific answer his mother gives is what really makes this a masterpiece. When Rohan asks why he needs to come home, his mother replies, "Because you are currently sleeping in your room." Let's just pause and deconstruct this brilliant double twist for a second. On one side of our reality, we have Rohan standing near a haunted well in the dead of night, staring down a ghost. But on the other side, we have a terrifying doppelganger, something pretending to be Rohan, currently sleeping in his bed, inside his supposedly safe home, right next to his vulnerable family. The psychological horror of that is staggering. The author has just violated the one single safe space we assumed still existed, the home.
The text tells us the phone drops from Rohan's hands. He is paralyzed by this impossible reality. I mean, the entity in his house, the entity in the well, his mind is literally breaking. And then he slowly turns around. Put yourself in his shoes for just a second. What would you even do in this impossible situation? You are completely alone in the dark. You've just been told you're simultaneously asleep in your bed, and the ghost from the well is suddenly no longer in front of you. The author stretches out the immense tension of this physical movement so well. Just the simple act of turning around becomes the most terrifying action in the world. Because as he turns, that stark white face with the pitch black eyes isn't in the well anymore. It is standing directly behind him, right over his shoulder, and it whispers directly into his ear. If you are Rohan, then who is sleeping in the house? Wow, let that sink in. The ghost isn't just some mindless monster out for blood. It's psychologically torturing him. It already knows about the doppelganger. It implies this was a coordinated trap from the start. This is the ultimate checkmate. Rohan isn't just going to die. He's going to die knowing his family is locked inside their house with something unimaginable.
So the crucial point is how the author actually chooses to close this loop. Let's look at the aftermath. The next day, the villagers search the area. The only thing they find is Rohan's flashlight, just abandoned near the old well. Rohan himself was never found. Notice how the author doesn't give us some gory, bloody description of an attack. Instead, they leave us with a terrifying absolute void. The village rules stated that whoever goes to the well at midnight never returns. The story brutally fulfills its own dark prophecy, leaving us with nothing but the cold, hard facts of a boy who vanished into the dark simply because he wouldn't listen.
But, of course, the author doesn't let us off the hook quite that easily, do they? Rohan is gone, completely consumed by the well. But what about his family? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer today. I highly recommend you trust the local lord the next time you hear a midnight warning. Because if Rohan vanished at the well, who or what was sleeping in his bed that night?